Dune Awakening had a dev stream where we got to see and hear lots of juicy info, but I know y'all ain't trying to wade through 2 hours of video, so let me condense it down, skip over the talking about rocks, and more rocks, give you the highlights and some thoughts on what we know, and some context to this statement that was made. Let's get to it. Alright, so several devs rotated to answer questions about their upcoming game, Dune Awakening, while also having someone play the game live. Other than to highlight specific things I feel need a visual aid, I'm going to let that footage play in the background and just go over what I feel is the most pertinent info. I organized it into sections as best I could and bookmarked it down below. I'm going to go through all the info as concisely as I can, state what was obviously said, and point out the not so obvious. I'll get into my general thoughts on it all at the end. If you're interested in gameplay discussions and extraction games, consider subscribing and checking out the Discord link down below. If you have a specific question regarding Dune Awakening, leave it down in the comments. I read them all and respond to most. Without wasting any more time, let's get rolling. Every gameplay video that I've seen on Dune Awakening shows that it's a mashup of an MMO that plays like a third-person shooter that has some survival elements. But when it comes to the endgame, that has some unique things implemented in order to try and solve old problems, hopefully without creating new ones. You start off with building a character and then choosing a class, but the class you pick is more malleable than traditional MMOs. You can find NPC trainers known as mentors throughout the map that allow you to cross-train with other classes and even train you in more advanced sections of your current skill trees. It has been said you will be eventually able to access all class abilities and techniques, you just need to level enough. So which one you start off with will largely only affect your starting and mid-level experience. The character they were playing on stream was level 53, and you can see they had lots of points into the Bene Gesserit class and at least some points in the Mentat class. At one point they swap out abilities from a pool of currently unlocked ones, which you can see they have not completed filling up. On the other side there are techniques which looks like just passive abilities. You can also see they haven't unlocked a third active ability, but there's clearly an icon showing it will be made available at some point. Previously we've learned this third ability is a capstone or quote-unquote ultimate ability. These are found at the top of their respective skill trees. Leveling seems pretty straightforward and much like an MMO. You reach a friendly town or POI, complete with the usual fare of NPCs and places to get missions from. The missions we were able to see were pretty basic, go here, go there, grab this, talk to this person, etc. But some had specific faction affiliation rewards attached to them. As of right now, we don't know all the benefits or negatives that come with said affiliations. One mission was sending you to the nearest testing station, which is for all intents and purposes this game's version of a dungeon. A large PvE POI, while it can be done solo, is designed for a group to tackle. Testing station loot leans heavily into the vehicle crafting materials. Now, even though you're not in the deep desert, the map still needs to be explored and scanned, revealing details of the map that may be extremely rewarding. Much like the mentor NPCs that we talked about earlier. It may not be needed every week like it does in the deep desert, but exploration is clearly heavily encouraged in Dune Awakening. There are also random events, one of which was a crashed ship. These crashed ships represent the only PvP zones outside of the deep desert. They are clearly marked, and you are clearly notified when you're entering such a zone. These sites have loot that lean more into the weapon crafting side. The other random event that was seen during the stream was a spice explosion. Now typically we've only ever seen these used to market the deep desert, so who knows whether there'll be PvP zones as well. Nothing's confirmed on this point, but I wouldn't be surprised either way. Combat looks pretty standard for most third-person shooters. You aim, you shoot, you use abilities that have cooldowns, etc. You can clearly see they have dodge mechanic, but I did not see an over-the-shoulder camera angle flip. I really hope this is a feature that isn't already, or at the very least added soon. It feels like a requirement for any game that handles like a third-person shooter nowadays. Now, I don't want to get too far into the weeds on the specifics of combat here, as we really only got a small look into the abilities, equipment, weapons, and such. There are lots of knowns and unknowns regarding passives that may or may not be at work here, so I'll leave this speculation for when we have something more tangible to work with. The enemy AI, from what I've seen, is built a lot like MMOs in terms of their aggro. A firefight that was happening around a corner from a group of enemies and they weren't aggroed into it. I know it's basically an MMO, but since the combat is structured more like a third-person shooter, I hope they make enemy interactions more dynamic. Next, we'll get into the monetization. It's going to be full release on May 20th. You can buy 3 different versions of the game that have various perks. Now, I'm going to assume you can easily read this chart and gather most of that information. And if you can't, well, I can pretend, and if I can pretend, so can you. I'm just going to clarify what some of these items may mean rapid fire. Build sets are cosmetic furniture you can use to decorate your bases. They come in all manner of styles. Swatches are color dyes that you can use to apply to whatever they're designated for. The Terrarium of the Muad'Dib is another cosmetic build set item. And the Season Pass is not a battle pass. They plan on monetizing through DLCs, which are planned to be released every 3 to 4 months. The Season Pass comes with the first 4 DLCs. As of the time of this recording, you can download the Benchmark and Character Creator demo, which gives you a knife skin for the game. This knife skin is strictly for the starting knife. With that being said, as of right now, I don't know if the armor skins you get in the Deluxe or Ultimate Editions are for specific armor sets or cosmetic skins that could be applied to any armor set. If I find out, I'll leave a pinned comment down below, and if you know the answer, please let me know. And then the head start on the 15th. I've been seeing some confusion regarding this, as the devs said that they weren't doing early access. When they said early access, they were referring to it in a way that Steam typically refers to it, as an incomplete game that you're buying into in order to further support the development process. They've stated that this is a complete product. While the quote-unquote head start gives you access to the game early, that's not what they meant when they said no early access. It's an easy thing to confuse, so it's understandable. They did state there's a difference in the head start servers, and they will be opening up release servers on the official release date. The info regarding the servers are still leaving a lot of unanswered questions, but here's what we know so far. First, to help communicate this a little better, here is this diagram. This entire picture represents one world. A world is a lot like a traditional server. So long as you and your friends are on the same world, you will be able to play together. Within a world, there are several Haga Basin servers, a Deep Desert server, as well as other social hub servers. The character you create is bound to the Haga Basin server you choose, which has a 40-person cap. But all Haga Basin maps are able to feed into the Deep Desert. This Haga Basin server is your home base, but you are able to visit a friend server and vice versa, as well as connecting in the Deep Desert. If your Haga Basin server is currently full, there will be a queue. There's currently no word on moving characters to different servers or if characters from different worlds can play with each other. While you might not need to be in the same Haga Basin server, at least make sure you're in the same world as people you want to play with, just to be on the safe side for now. A small detail that I think has big implication that was said is that the Deep Desert has a quote lower level, or its entry area, that is PvE only and can be built on, which changes things considerably. Okay, so now that we've covered the most pertinent gameplay info, here are some things that I think are worth discussing. For starters, there's always some kind of schism between PvE players and PvP players, and Dune Awakening is clearly attracting both kinds. In the interview, the devs stated that the game is 98% PvE and 2% PvP, until you get to the Deep Desert, when it becomes the reverse. Should you decide to venture into that 2%, the penalties for dying are extremely forgiving. You lose some durability in your equipment, resources you haven't deposited into your base yet, there's no loot loss otherwise, and you respawn quickly. And once you get to the Deep Desert, it has a staging area that further reduces the recovery time of death within the Deep Desert once you get there. So with all that being said, players who are only interested in PvE have practically nothing to complain about. Depending on who you ask, the game has anywhere between 40 to 100 hours of content before you ever have to think of PvP. So let's cut that down by half just to be conservative. Most single player games struggle to deliver that these days. I've seen comments referring to this game as a PvP oriented game when everything we've seen and heard so far points in the opposite direction. So complaining about a completely avoidable part of the game is going to come off a bit whiny at this point. On the flip side, PvP players have bigger concerns. The Deep Desert is considered the end game, and how quickly you gain access to it is unknown. So if you're mainly attracted to PvP, you probably need to get comfortable with the idea of slogging through a lot of PvE before getting that opportunity, which will make convincing your friends into picking up the game more difficult. To be honest though, if the Deep Desert PvP is compelling enough, I don't think it's that big of a hurdle, as PvP players generally deal with obstacles better. There are a bunch of other factors that lead me to believe that Dune Awakening could be setting itself up to disappoint both communities. I covered them in my previous video, linked above. But the detail about being able to build directly in the Deep Desert in a non-PvP zone is pretty huge. Guilds will be able to set up staging areas right on the server, and prior to the weekly wipe, safely export whatever they see fit and then repeat. I already thought FOBs, or forward operating bases, would be a thing, but now a guild could build a staging area at the beginning of the week and set up a fob further inland in the deep desert. This extends their footprint, which increases the chance of conflict. But there are some potential issues in front of us, and I'm going to frame this with show me the incentives and I'll show you the behavior. Since you cannot raid a base in the deep desert unless there's a sandstorm, you can't really loot kills for anything significant, and guilds will likely be able to safely transport resources gained to safety. The vast majority of PvP encounters will be at the harvesting areas themselves. Otherwise, there's very little to gain. It also won't take long for guilds to have enough resources to not go for these harvest sites until they see someone else there. This isn't good and likely results in one of two responses, either hyper-aggression or quitting, both due to boredom. PvP players will be starved for action, and PvE players will be in an environment where PvP players are desperate for that action. So a relatively small sighting might generate way more of a reaction than they would otherwise. In an effort to soften the loss and frustration with features we've mentioned previously, Dune Awakening may inadvertently create more of it, and that's the hyper-aggression response. The reverse might just happen as well. Many might just decide to drop the game at that point rather than endlessly explore the desert only to ever get crumbs. Now I know there's the faction warfare stuff, but if the actions that the players have to conduct aren't fun for their own sake, I don't think it's going to be enough of a carrot to keep players coming back. Sure, PvE players will be happy to run the hamster wheel, endlessly grind to push one number higher than the other, but I can easily see PvP players going out of their way to hunt these harvest parties just to engage in the very gameplay the Deep Desert is supposed to be providing. I feel like this is a setup that's bound to upset both types of players. If more loot could be gathered from kills in combat, PvP players would prioritize larger conflict opportunities regardless of where they are. This allows PvE-oriented players to deliberately lower their profile and become less attractive targets. Maybe I'm completely off base, but it feels like unless there's a shift in incentives, you're going to see a very empty deep desert. I hope I'm wrong. I plan on playing the game and maybe even streaming it, but we'll see. If you've made it this far, I'd like to ask you to consider subscribing. If you have any questions, leave a comment. And even if you don't, leave a comment. It helps the algorithm. Thanks so much for watching, and good hunting.